On this episode, a framework that I use to keep myself sane when everything seems too tough implementing this water sensitive urban design thing. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about that situation where you're trying to improve the way we manage water, improve the way we manage stormwater, strive towards this water sensitive city future, whatever that might look like. And it's all getting a bit much and a bit frustrating. We are going to talk about a framework of how I process that and how I view it in the context of history and other aspects of the water cycle, and why that makes me quite positive about what's going to come next. This video will tie in quite nicely to episode 163, where we talked about how we as people go about predicting the future and why we're actually really bad at doing that. So let's get into it. For this story to make sense, you need to know a little bit about how I got into the industry. So I joined the industry in 2010 as a student working for Logan City Council, going out and finding all of Logan's stormwater treatment assets for the first time. They had been getting developers to implement them in new development since, I think the legislation started in 2006, they saw their first assets in 2007. And by 2010 there was quite a wave of these assets coming through. Logan was receiving lots, and so it was my job to go out, find them, make a register of them, find out what condition they were in. And one of the many things that I noticed was a little bit of a pattern that we have represented up here on a bit of a spectrum we're going to refer to, the past into the present, and a bit of a spectrum. And what I noticed in this situation was that some of the older assets that Logan was receiving, they were quite variable in nature. They bounced around, different little things tried here and there. Some of them seemed a little silly, some of them made a bit of sense. But then, even by 2010, even only a couple of years later, it has started to kind of normalise down to a consistent pattern. A consistent straight line of everything's pretty similar. Now, I'm not saying that those were good assets, I'm just saying that the variation had disappeared. So, we could see that situation. And for me, as the person who joined the industry in that time, I'm going to draw myself up. For me, as the person who joined the industry at that time, I had certain perspective. I could view the industry through the lens of what I was seeing. So I could see everything that fell into that range. I could see from 2010, where I was, back to the assets in about 2006. And so I could see this, and some of them were, even some of this stuff here where stuff had normalised wasn't particularly good. And I started to get pretty frustrated at that stage in my career. Started to get a little bit down about what was going on. Started to get very down, actually. It's kind of embarrassing how down on this all I was at that point. But the point here was I was judging based on what I was seeing. Now, I've also since come to recognise that that's not the only way to learn about this stuff. You can go further back in time by, you can talk to people who've been around for longer. You can read stuff about the history of water sensitive urban design. You can watch these videos as I try and share what little I've learned about the history before this point. So you can, the solid line here is our direct experience of what we've seen. You can also go back a little further in time and find out a little bit more by talking to other people, finding out what's going on. But as the kind of dotted line represents, it's a little fuzzier because you haven't experienced it firsthand. And even if you have experienced it firsthand, you know what memories are like. They start to fade, we start to lose a little bit of the detail. So the further back we go, the things get a little bit fuzzier. So I started to recognise that there might be a bit of a cycle going on here. But the longer I spent in the industry, the more I then started to realise that, actually, I think there's cycles embedded within cycles here. So let me, for a second in high speed, draw you up another cycle. And this is the next cycle. What I noticed was this: even though I had first up experienced this bioretention cycle of fiddling around with different designs and then it settled down, that prior to that we'd also gone through another cycle here, which was fiddling around with different treatment types coming up and down, and then them settling into something at that particular time. So you can see here that we've got, in this particular graph, we've got a bit of like oscillation up and down with early gross pollutant trap designs. So we're sitting back in like the 90s here. Oscillation up and down with early gross pollutant trap designs, which then kind of settle out as we work out what's working and not working in that space. But then within that, people also come up with other different treatment types, which then get the variation. So while we've got the little squiggles happening here, we've also got a general bigger pattern doing this. Can you see that pattern? Oh, down, up, down a little across, down, up, down a little across. You see we've got two cycles. We've got this cycle embedded in there, and then we've got the same general pattern again happening overall. So what I noticed was this, is that we have cycles within cycles as we're working this particular stuff out. So GPTs, yeah, they were kind of cool, the first impression. Actually, they're not kind of perfect. Now we've got this new idea of wetlands. We've bounced around a little. They don't do everything either. So we've bounced up to swales. Some of this stuff's gone out of favour. GPTs have gone out of favour a little. Swales came in, then they went out of favour. Bio came in. It's stuck around way more solidly than anything else has in this space for a little while, which is why it then gets a long line outside. What this then looks like, and so actually what we should now do is superimpose ourselves onto this particular cycle here, right? So initially, when I joined the industry, so that was the initial me that I saw. Now, current me, further down the track, that was me in 2010, this is me in 2017. You can now see this bit directly. It also has been able to talk to other people and see this stuff with a little bit of fuzziness. And yet we're in this situation where when we're working really hard on trying to implement any of this or any of this, it can get pretty frustrating because some of this stuff's not working out the way we want it to. But for ages, I've wondered about something else. I've wondered about, well, what was it like? Because people often go, what often gets said in this space is people like, look, I get why you're trying to implement this stormwater stuff, but it's really, really hard. Like, you know, water and sewer and traditional stormwater drainage, they work because like they're easy, they're really good, they work because they're simple. But this water sensitive stuff, it's all too tough. Those technologies don't work. Just, you know, we're just not getting into this. And I, for ages, was like, well, hang on. What happened when we first started building water and sewer systems? Did they just magically appear and just magically work from the outset? And the answer is not really sure because of this fuzziness thing, right? So I've experienced firsthand these 7 years. I can find out about kind of the last 20 years or so by asking people. I could probably go back a little bit further than that, but I can't go all the way back to the beginnings of sewering the city. It just gets fuzzier and fuzzier the longer you go back. But my hypothesis, once I started to spot these cycles, is that actually it's almost certain that if we go right back to the early days of watering and sewering the cities, that they actually went through these exact same cycles themselves. Let's draw that up. And so this is the water. This is, you know, my graphical representation of what happened in water. Starting back when people first started to supply water, it could be sewerage as well, right? First started to supply water to cities through like centralized infrastructure. I'm sure that there would have been different occasions where they bobbled around trying to figure out different things. Spin around over here. I have a funny feeling that maybe firstly they had to figure out, well, what are ways of getting water to people? Maybe tried a different few options there. Then maybe had to come out to a period where they had to figure out, okay, maybe how do we treat water? Tried a few different options in this sort of field, jumped around a little, then had another problem. But then eventually all these different cycles within cycles settled out and we arrived with the fairly consistent way we've supplied water for a long period of time here. And so this starts to explain why I don't think we should be afraid, even if we are looking here at water sensitive urban design and seeing that it's really tough now, why we shouldn't be worried about that, and why we definitely shouldn't be trying to extrapolate it back onto what we see of the water cycle. Because let's just draw me in once more here. What I see of the water cycle is that period there, plus maybe I can research back a little bit and ask other people who are still in the industry. I can get back maybe 40 years of first-hand knowledge in the industry here. And what I see is, it's all great, but it's not great because it was inherently easy to make in the first place. It only appears great because we can't look far enough back to see the initial problems. And so this then ties into episode 163, because in that episode what we explained was that when we as people try and predict the future, we're actually really, really, really bad at doing it, because the future is made up by interconnecting all sorts of different ideas and bringing them together in completely novel and new ways. But the way we as people try and predict the future, so that's the way we create the future. We create the future by combining novel and interesting things in all sorts of different ways. But the way we can predict the future, standing here, is by looking back over our experience and just extrapolating that forward with a slight different change to it. So we extrapolate it forward as, it's not that, but it might be that instead. We extrapolate forward something that's really, really similar to what we've seen in the past. So what happens here is a cognitive bias comes into play when we go, WSUD's hard to implement. Look, see, I'm seeing WSUD's hard to implement. It's all over the shop. We're trying all sorts of different stuff. It hasn't really sorted itself out. It has stabilized, but we're not completely happy with that, where that's stabilized. And we go, but look at this water thing. It's brilliant. It's stable. We're really happy. We get water from it all the time. It's a cognitive bias because we're not comparing apples with apples. We are comparing water here. Well, we're comparing stormwater, like this aspect of stormwater is one of these here. What we're not seeing is the fact that when we're looking here and trying to predict forward what's happening to stormwater next, that it's actually got another bobble to go somewhere else and somewhere else before it eventually, some point, settles down over this point. This is where we want to get to, right? And this should make us feel really positive. It should be a reason to go, oh, actually, the fact that this stuff is hard at the moment is okay, because it's part of the journey to get us here. It should also, though, for anyone, so far everything I've talked about water sensitive urban design in this context has been about WSUD, the stormwater. But it should also give us hope as to, people talk about water sensitive city, and like people are talking about fundamentally changing the way we supply water to cities, how we manage the whole water cycle to make the water sensitive city, right? People are talking about changing this thing that's been set in place for ages and has actually been pretty damn good, right? Let's be honest. There are problems with this, but it's also pretty awesome. This framework also should make us pretty positive about what can happen in this space, because if we have macro cycles embedded with like microcycles and mesocycles in macrocycles, there's nothing to say that this macro cycle isn't also embedded in another crazy ass cycle going on here, right? And that there isn't another, that it's not just this isn't just another one of these within another cycle. And so we've been through, well, this is where, if you've seen this before, if you haven't seen this before, look up Rebecca Brown. Let me draw this for a second. There's a diagram that you often see in water sensitive urban design and water sensitive city, which is the different phases of a water city. And it goes, I'm going to get the order slightly wrong here, but it goes drained, or is it drained, watered, sewered, waterways, water cycle, water sensitive. I think it goes in that order, but it represents the changes over time as we go through different types of the city as different priorities. Firstly, we figure out we need to, well, it's probably water supply first. Anyway, figure out early on that we need to supply water, figure out that we need to get rid of sewage, figure out that we need to get rid of stormwater. Yeah, this order's better. This order makes more sense. Figure that we need to get rid of stormwater, figure that actually we need waterways healthy, figure that, actually we're kind of dealing with all these a little bit separately. Let's try to bring them together into the water cycle. Let's try to really holistically bring it together into the water cycle of the water sensitive city. What we're really saying it here is if you're someone who's trying to create maybe the jump from there to there, or the jump from there to there, what you're actually looking at is going, this cycle that I've described here is the paradigm that we're in there. The jump out to here is like stepping up the next cycle again. Wow, there's a lot to try and imagine in that. I'm wondering right now whether this has made any sense to you. I'm hoping that it has. This is actually the second time that I've recorded this video. I feel this version has gone better, so if it's not making any sense to you, please feel glad that you didn't see the first version of this video. But that's it, that's the concept. This is the concept that I use to keep myself sane when everything that we're working on at the moment seems really, really tough. I look back at time, I remind myself not to make this mistake down here of just looking at the flat line of the other water, other bits of the water cycle, but I actually look properly back in time and go, you know what? Every time we come up with a new idea, it bobbles around for a little, jumps out, bobbles around, but it finally settles down to something useful. What we have to do is keep pushing through the bobbles and not let them get us down, and not accidentally go and compare us to other things that have already settled down really quickly. Now, if I wanted to take this one more step further to make myself feel really sane about this, where I would go to get inspiration is I would go and look for things, aspects of the world or innovations that have changed relatively recently, so within the living memory, that have bobbled around a fair bit, that were tough initially, but then settled out well. It's those things that I'd go and try and compare water sensitive urban design and water sensitive city 2 to keep myself sane working in this space. Because it's those ones that are close enough within our living memory that we can see both the good outcome at the end that we see here, but we can also see the variation that happened before it. Because that's the problem. This variation's too far away. This variation's a couple of hundred years ago, right? We can't possibly see it, so we forget about it, or we get our views distorted by the great water supply and sewage systems that we currently see today. What we actually need to do is we are looking to compare what we're currently doing in WSUD and try and get a reference point of where we are in the bobbles. We need to pick things that have changed in society within living memory, preferably not ages ago in living memory, but more recently living memory, so we can see that uncertainty. We can see maybe what people did in overcoming that uncertainty, possibly because they're alive, we could even go and talk to them. And then we can see the fact that it did sort itself out, that it did settle down, and things are good, and we can take hope, and we can take solace from that eventually, if we push through this stuff, we'll get to an answer. But it won't necessarily be fire retention, it could be something else. And that's it. That's the episode. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.